Thank you so much, Mr. Bribely. He has had a huge impact on our family, Rob's and mine, and our 6 children's lives, and the lives of so many of your children, and maybe some of your grandchildren. It's wonderful to be here and to share a little bit about my story. We all are right now, in one way or the other, joined together because of Imago. It's like a road that at some point or another we've entered and have gone with for years, some of us in years. So I want to tell you a little bit of history about our journey and some other things along the way. But first I wanted to share a couple of verses with you. Proverbs 19:6 says, "The heart of man plans his way, but the Lord establishes his steps." In Psalm 23:3, "He guides me along paths of righteousness for his name's sake." And another verse in Psalm 23 says, "When we submit ourselves to the Lord, he makes our paths straight." Well, I am thankful that Rob and I and our kids have chosen this nice straight path that has led to Imago. And I just want to go back in history for a minute and tell you all about it. Right now, I can just tell you that Rob and I have 6 children that are ages 30 to 40, and we have traveled since before all that. You see, I better wear my glasses. My history really goes back to earlier than the Imago school. I was taking a class at our alma mater, my former student's alma mater, and I was an education major. Well, we got to talking about curriculum, and we were going through all basically public school curriculum, and that was all okay. But then we got to something called Christian schooling. And I don't know if you had reservations about sending your child to a Christian school, but after looking at this, I sure did. The only Christian schooling we were introduced to was these little worksheets that said, "Ask Jesus to help you with his paper." And at the bottom it said, "Thank you for his answers to you." And immediately I thought, well, what about this kid gets 100 and this kid gets 10 wrong? And I'm thinking, does God love that kid who gets 100 more than the kid who got 10 wrong? Absolutely not. I said this, I am never going to teach at a Christian school, and I am never going to send my children to a Christian school. Well, you know, when you're 20 years old, you say things that maybe you will regret later in life. And so, but that was not my intention. It was interesting that at that time, when I was in that class, other things were going on behind the scenes that I knew nothing about. At that time, 2 wonderful women, Judy Ward and Linny Dye, who had met at Le Brie in Switzerland, were planning to start a classical Christian school, something I knew nothing of. At the same time, I'm going to go fast forward. At that time, they were planning. But 1980 was a very important year in all of our lives. In 1980, I married my husband. We moved to Cleveland, where he was still in school, and I was teaching kindergarten and first grade those first 2 years. And then we moved to, and at the same time, Linny and Judy, along with Bev Aronson, started the Imago school with those 13 families, or 13 children? 13 children. So they had gotten off to a start. Well, this is the incredible part. When Rob and I moved to Massachusetts, he got a job at Data General on Route 30, basically, and we got an apartment right there where he could walk to work. And I got a job just down the street at a private school, about 10 minutes or so down the road. I was teaching many things. But anyway, at the back-to-school night, when the my parents came to meet the teachers, I was introduced as a new teacher who had gone to Wheaton College in Illinois. And Marty Kais nearly jumped out of her skin, and she had a student there. I had one of her children as a student. And she ran up to me and said, "Oh my goodness, a teacher from Wheaton College in Illinois, you must be a Christian." I said, "Well, yes, I am." And she couldn't believe there was a Christian at that school that was not a Christian school. Anyway, she said, I work at L'Abri. I said, isn't L'Abri in Switzerland? I actually read the book when I was in high school. And she said, no, we've just in 1980 opened up a new branch here in Southborough. I said, well, where? Well, it was halfway between my school and my apartment, which were only about 10 minutes from each other. So it was right on that same main drag of Route 30. I thought, isn't it amazing? Don't we have an amazing God who puts these things in line ahead of us? Well, that spring, they had an education conference at L'Abri. And I wasn't particularly fond of the school I was teaching at for many reasons. And so I handed my resume to Lenny and Judy at that L'Abri conference, education conference. And the next fall, I found myself in that teeny tiny school in those 3 rooms where I had half a room for teach 3rd and 4th grade, because they were expanding from just Bev Aronson teaching 1 through 4 and Lenny doing the rest, and Judy having a quarter of a classroom for her office. They gave me a half a classroom for the 3rd and 4th grade, and the 1st and 2nd grade became the chapel, and Lenny's room was the 5th or 8th grade, and sometimes the 7th grade would go into the other little quarter room. And also she had all the costumes and scenery, because at that time she made everything out of cardboard boxes. And we had a lot of things in her room. So it was a tiny little school, but I loved it. I loved the students. Some of them are now 50 years old. But I had a great time being there, and I worked there until the day before my first child was born. I had a conference at 3, and he was born the next morning. Surprise, surprise. And so that began me. Well, during that time, I thought, yes, I absolutely do want my kids at a Christian school if it's going to be like this, because I was very excited about the curriculum. I really loved the open court reading books that they used. I liked how there was such an emphasis on writing and reading, and the kids had to memorize states and countries, and I loved the fact that every day began with chapel. The kids had to memorize so many songs that were based on scripture verses. That was really, really important to me. And I know that music, like Steve would say, the words of music just ring true in my heart. I wasn't going to put this in here, but I'm just going to let you know that at one point I was told I had thyroid cancer, and when I learned it, the words from scripture and from hymns and psalms and spiritual songs flooded my soul and just gave me so much peace and joy. And when I returned to school after that healing time over a summer, I was so delighted that Pastor Heinz and Steve Weibly had the whole school cheer and thank God that I was well. So that was really meaningful to me. Steve has been really important in our lives. Okay, let's get back to the topics I was going to cover. Anyway, during the time that my kids were little, the only real contact I had was coming to concerts and plays, and I came to Winterfest and helped out. I couldn't wait for Patrick to get there. The education they got was pretty incredible. I really loved how they worked on vocabulary, and by the end of 1st grade, the kids knew how to write a really fine paragraph. I have to tell you that when my son, after going to Imago through 8th grade, got to high school, he went to a public high school because that's what we could manage financially. It was in our town, and the school was small. Rob and I went to the parent-teacher conferences, and every teacher, except the math teacher, said, "Where did your child learn to write like that?" They had never seen anything like it. I was aware that by the time he got to 4th grade, I stopped him once to try to see how his paper was going, and I realized he'd already passed me out with his skills because he had such fine writing. And Lenny would take the time to really work one by one, and I know that other kids who went on beyond them have had teachers that took the time to help them with their sentence structure and their ideas. So that has been huge in their lives, because now they've gone on to big, not better, but just different things in their lives where it's come in really handy. I would say my children would say of all things that was important to them in their adult lives was the opportunity that they had to get on stage. And every child was required to be on stage, whether they had any talent or not. Whether they were shy or outgoing, they had to be on stage. Kindergartners, when I was there, oh, did I tell you that part? No, I guess I haven't gotten there. But later in life, I returned to teach at Imago kindergarten for 8 years when my youngest was 12. And that was a complete and utter delight. My kindergartners were on stage 5 times in the first year they were at Imago. It was required, and they just had to get used to it. Everyone had to do it. Everyone had to sing. Everyone had to play instruments. It wasn't a choice, but they got such a great education because of all those things they were required to do. And they were required to do it with loving, caring teachers who really, really invested in their lives. It was small so they could know them. Okay, back to my notes. I really love teaching kindergarten, but I never was a public speaker. Kindergarten is my area. Anyway, I just also want to mention as I go along here that I was so delighted that one of Patrick, my oldest classmates from first grade up, became my successor as a kindergarten teacher, and I couldn't think of a better person as Denise to take over my job. So I was really delighted about that. Let's see. One of the things that stuck out to me beyond the school was the community of Imago, being like a family. The friendships my children made with other children were really important to me. And I knew something about the kind of home life that the other children had, and so I felt very comfortable with our children playing with one another inside school and outside of school. I'm just going to give you a couple of examples, but one example I wanted to share with you is one of our children had trouble at one point on the playground. I love the fact that there's a lot of opportunity for creativity on the playground, building forts and doing all kinds of fun things that maybe you wouldn't get to do in a public school. My child was being chased. My little boy was being chased by some girls. And he did not know what to do because he knew he couldn't slug them, but he really wanted to. And this went on, and he would mention it, and finally I thought, well, maybe I should call the parent. So I called the parent up, and the most wonderful thing happened. The father answered and said, let me go talk to her. He went to that little girl and said, have you been chasing someone at school? And she said, yes, I have. I didn't want to, but my friends were doing it, and I just didn't know how to get out of it, so I just kept doing it. And she started to cry. Well, she knew she was kind of caught in her own sin. And the father prayed with her, and she confessed it and was forgiven and went back and didn't do it anymore. I was impressed that the father called me back, and he thanked me because his daughter had been stuck in something that wasn't good for her as well as for my son. And we worked that all out. And that is a precious part of being at the Imago School. You as parents can really communicate with each other in a similar way because you know about love and forgiveness and how important it is to confess our sins one to another. When I was, as a parent and as a teacher, I had high expectations for my children. I'm glad the teachers had high expectations for them. At the same time, they realized that all our children are different. I was a primary example. I had children that excelled easily, and I had children that struggled. I don't know how Mr. Weibly got my son Griffin to sing a modern major general. He literally, truthfully, has slow processing speed. He still does. But somehow that very fast-paced song, I do not know to this day how he got him to sing all those words so quickly for someone who could, that's just impossible seeming to me, how he got them to do that. So they are compassionate and they can work with your child because there aren't so many of them and they really try to do their best with each one wherever their skills are. When I was teaching kindergarten, I did nothing different than any other teacher had done about teaching children reading. Some kids came to me with only knowing their alphabet, and others were reading good, solid chapter books. And we just took them right where they were and kept leading them on. But one thing I thought was important was for those who are just learning, to get them involved with as many of our senses as possible. Because multisensory teaching is really important for little ones, and it had been before I got there with the first graders, and it still remains an important part of their learning. I loved teaching kindergarten because it was fun. I always tell people I'm a kindergarten at heart. I love play, and I think it's really important for children to learn through play. My first class, I was surprised who came in didn't have a lot of play skills because they were wanting to talk about video games and things in the middle of school. So I literally went and played with them and helped them to see how just acting out parts and being someone that you're not is really an important thing. I also wanted to share another example of something that was important to me teaching kindergarten, and it's been important for my own children too. Many years ago, I read Charlotte Mason's books, or at least some of them, and I learned that this phrase, "I may not want to, but I will." I also taught my children, not only may I want to, I may not want to, but I will, but I may want to, but I won't. The first one talks about obedience, and the second one talks about self-control. I had a little boy in kindergarten one day that said to me, "I don't want to do that." I remember saying to him, "That's okay. You don't have to want to. You just have to do it." And I think that really freed him up to embrace whatever work he was given to do. So that was good. Anyway, Rob and I are very excited for all of you who have children in this school that you're going to be expanding the school to include high school. That is something that we didn't have the opportunity to for very much of our time there. And I think it's wonderful for the school to be growing like it is, and all of you make that possible. Rob and I regularly pray for Imago, and we regularly donate to Imago because we feel it's really important for students, all students, to have the opportunity to come, and that's why we're here tonight, to raise money for those who need extra help coming to Imago. And I am just thrilled to be a part of that. Rob and I are moving on and moving out towards our home in Vermont as our permanent location, so we won't be here on the regular basis that we have been. But I'm really thrilled that the school is in really good hands, is going to thrive and grow, but it does take all of us to come alongside the people who are sticking with it, bringing their children, the children that will come in the future, and I think that's why we really think it's important that everyone's extremely generous as you can be. So I just want to say thank you so much for letting me have a long part of my adult life at Imago. It's been really a wonderful blessing. Thanks.